Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. My name is Martin Lugmayr. I'm working for the Energy Department of the United Nations Industrial Development Organization. It's a pleasure to introduce you today briefly into the Global Network of Regional Sustainable Energy Centers program, which we are coordinating here at the UNIDO headquarters in Vienna, Austria, together with the regional economic communities all around the world. I will just switch now to my PowerPoint presentation. I will share my screen. Yeah, basically, the Global Network of Regional Sustainable Energy Centers program has evolved over time. So it was started with the first center in 2010 in West Africa. And in the meantime, this model was replicated all around the world because there was demand in several regions to strengthen the regional capacities to accelerate energy and climate transition. And that is also our guiding principle. That's to say, we want to accelerate, we want to drive the energy transition from the region for the region. We all heard about the latest assessments, which kind and which magnitude of investments are necessary to bring us to net zero by 2050. And we are in UNIDO, we are convinced that the regional level has to play a very important role. So to come away just from fragmented national approaches to integrated regional approaches. And I think there are some encouraging results from different regions, also from the European Union, but also from West Africa, where some of these centers are already operating, which we have established. So my name is Martin Lugmayr. I'm the coordinator of this program. And it's a pleasure now for me to introduce you briefly. Let's just say where the network stands currently, what are the basics, what is the background of this network, how these centers are intervening, and which benefits they have, and finally also which quality principles our program is following. So I will go now through that presentation. Next slide. Yeah. Yeah, basically what we are doing with these programs, we are helping the regional economic commissions, which are very often political organizations, in the establishment of these regional sustainable energy centers, which are technical institutions. So they are usually part and owned by the regional economic commissions and the member states, and they support the general integration efforts of those economic communities. As we all know, the first mission of economic communities is always to bring forward peace and security through joint cooperation, but on the other hand, also driving forward economic integration, because it brings benefits for all if you have an integrated market with freedom of movement of services and so on. So basically, the renewable energy and energy efficiency technologies, they are part of these markets, they are products and services, and we are introducing them into the market of developing countries. And some of these products and services are just new. So you bring them into the market, and that you can do sometimes much better on regional level, because there you have more, you can have more scale, more economies of scale. Currently, the network comprises 8 operating centers. They are covering more than 100 countries, and they are covering most of the least developed countries and the small island developing states. Also, I want to mention that we're having still 2 centers under development, and these 2 centers will also come online, let's just say next year, one in Central Africa and one in the Central Asian region. And then the picture will be complete, as other regions have already established regional institutions, like, for example, Latin America with OLADE, or the ASEAN region with the ASEAN Energy Center. We will start to have a cooperation with these 2 centers, but not establish new centers. So basically, our network and the individual centers are influencing the lives and the energy futures of more than 1.2 billion energy consumers. So they are setting very important standards on regional level, which are then implemented on national level. And so the impact of this network is more long-term and not short-term, because it takes time until regional changes triple down on national level and then transform also in concrete investments and changes on the ground. Usually these centers have high level approval by ministers and heads of states. So they have a very high level justification. And those centers are not accountable to UNIDO or to the United Nations. Those centers primarily are accountable to the region and the member states. And that is something very important for our program. So these centers are not centers of UNIDO. They are from the beginning developed as centers of the region, and ownership is very important for the long-term sustainability of the centers. And it's also, let's just say, it's a question also of innovation. United Nations supports innovative new institutional arrangements, which then becoming self-sustainable in the long run. So usually these centers are very well connected to the member states. So they're working through national focal institutions. So each of the members, as they are official organizations of the respective region, the ministers appoint national focal institutions, which are usually the ministries of energy, but sometimes also the National Energy Agency, where one is existing. And the centers work through that national focal institution. So the beauty is that the work of the center becomes the daily business of the officials, of the public servants in the energy ministries. So regional activities become part of the normal work in the ministry. Also, these centers are becoming very quickly important hubs for local and international partnerships. Various partnerships with international partners, international energy organizations, but also the private sector, just because in many of the developing regions where we are working, it's difficult also for investors, or it's difficult for international organizations which don't have a local office to work on national level. So it's always good to have a regional hub so that programs can also have a spillover effects on other countries. So currently you see below the logos of the different centers. So we have several networks of regional centers. We have a sub-network for Africa and the Arab region. So we will soon, then the GenSec will cover the entire African continent. We are just, so there's one with the Southern African Development Community, one with the Eastern African Community, one with the Economic Community for West African States, one with the Arab League, which is based in Egypt. And we are currently finalizing the process for the Central African Center together with the Economic Community of Central African States. There is also a subnetwork for Latin America and the Caribbean. So basically there we have two centers which are covering the Central American states and the Caribbean community states. And we intend, as I mentioned before, also to have a cooperation with OLADE, which is already existing and is promoting integrative efforts, particularly in Southern America. With focus on Southern America, we try to get an arrangement together with OLADE to cover also this angle of the Latin America Caribbean subnetwork. Then we also have a subnetwork for Asia and the Pacific. So there we're having one center covering all the Pacific, the 22 Pacific islands, the PICRI, and we have one center also covering the Himalaya Hindu Kush, where I have to say that this center is a bit a special center, as it does not cover the entire countries which are in the Himalaya Hindu Kush. They are just covering, they're just dealing with the mountain energy issues of the Himalaya Hindu Kush countries, what is a very important aspect, as we all know that decentralized renewable energy solutions are playing a very important role there to promote, on the one hand, the household electrification, but also on the other hand, promoting productive uses. Finally, we are currently also working there, as I mentioned before, together with the Economic Cooperation Organization on a new center which will cover Central Asia, Iran, Afghanistan, Pakistan, and Turkey. This is also in a very final stage of preparation, and we suppose that this center will come online next year also. So basically here you see the GenSec map. When you look at Africa, we are really covering soon the entire African continent through these centers, which are bringing support from the region for the region. It's the best support what the region can get, as there is also joint learning, and this joint learning happens locally. So this, particularly on the African continent, is very interesting, as now these centers become also partners of several African Union initiatives, which aim to establish a continental African electricity and harmonized electricity market and energy market. And on the other hand, also it's part of the efforts of the African Union, for example, to establish a continental free trade zone, where for sure the products and services related to renewables and energy efficiency are part of, and the centers have an important mandate in this regard. Yes, I mentioned already before, Latin America looks, South America looks blank now, but we're trying to get an agreement with UNIDO, and also in the South Asia. Currently, the network is not really covering South Asia, Southeast Asia. So we are trying to get an agreement with the ASEAN Energy Center in this regard. So what are the benefits for the region to establish such centers? We call it also a new deal for inclusiveness in that regard, because we strengthen the local capacities in the to shape the unique energy and climate transition of the region. We know that all pathways, they are a bit different. The European pathway is different, the Asian pathway is different, and also each region coming to net zero, each region has its own unique way of the energy transition, as they share common values, common history, but very often also common electricity or energy standards. So it's good to do that on sub-regional level, to promote that particular sub-regional level. So what these centers are doing, usually we have the regional organizations which are doing fantastic work in setting regional policies, but sometimes it's then difficult to have the technical capacities to implement that policy. So we had in the past many cases where these policies were finally not implemented because there was just not the regional capacity there. So through these centers, we create this capacity to plan, to coordinate, and monitor the energy transition. We also move, let's say, the ownership on the energy transition to the region, and also the priority setting. We know particularly in regions which are less developed, very often these priorities are set by partners from outside. And through these centers, we bring that to the region, for the region. Let's just say that the region itself can come up with its priorities for the next 10, 20, 30 years in this energy transition. And then international partners are helping in this regard, in line with the set priorities by the region, for the region. We also know that through regional cooperation, you can address barriers jointly, and that at much lower cost and with shared resources. I think that is a very interesting aspect of regional cooperation. You can create a joint makerspace where you can join a multi-stakeholder makerspace, where you can join resources together and move forward jointly. You can accelerate equal progress of the region. You leave nobody behind. We know what is the reality in many regions. There are some champions regarding the promotion of renewables or energy efficiency. Some are much ahead, some are much behind. And through regional cooperation, you can bring everybody to the same speed, and you also can create some sort of competition between the countries. We have seen that with in some regions where we have set regional renewable energy policies in partnership with the centers, like for example in ECOWAS, where the setting of regional targets, and then each country has to develop a national action plan for renewables and energy efficiency, really triggered a competition between countries, because everybody wanted to be ahead. in that process. And we see also the results today, where some countries in West Africa really have made major progress. We also can create economies of scale, and that is very important. So we through the creation of a common product and service market, you can just create economies of scales which are necessary. It's much easier to integrate new products and services, innovative products and services, also business models into the market if you do that regionally, because it just goes faster, and it's much more interesting for the private sector and also financiers to do that at bigger scale. So the region level plays a very important role in this regard. For example, currently we're doing a very nice program together with the center in Southern Africa, Eastern Africa, and West Africa, where we move forward. We jointly introduce regional standards for energy efficiency appliances and lighting, and these standards on regional level are translated on standards on national level currently. And basically, that is a very effective process, because then you don't need to invent the wheel in every country and everywhere you have different standards. No, you have one standard. And this standard is very much shaped by the local interests. We also know that standards are trade, there are some trade interests behind, and it's important that standards are inclusive for developing countries, so they can also ensure they are part of the value chain of these new efficient products and services, and partly maybe can be assembled locally, like LED lighting, for example. We want to create spillover effects that we can do fantastically on regional level, and a very important point, we want to contribute to donor harmonization and alignment. We know there's a natural competition between international partners for resources, and we bring that to the local level. That means the local level sets the standards on regional level, and international partners then align with these priorities. And there's a division of labor, which is coordinated ideally by the local beneficiary. But our network also has a very important international function. So we heard about these goals by 2015 to come to net zero. We know what is the way forward. We need to scale up. We need to mobilize 130 trillion US dollar of investment, which mostly goes into renewables, mostly goes into energy efficiency and electrification of the end-use sectors like transport, directly or indirectly through the use of hydrogen. And this massive investment needs changes, and that's, you can go much faster if you work through the regional level. And that we can do with the center. So there's some public good. So with this program, we introduced the public good, a regional infrastructure for international cooperation and partnership. So it closes a bit the missing link between the environmental conventions or climate conventions and national and the national implementation level. And finally, a very important point, I already tapped on that, is that these centers testimony and the advocate for an inclusive energy transition, which creates local jobs and revenues, because it's really important which policies you introduce, which standards, which regulations introduce. You always think about that this is also part of your industrialization policy of your country. So you also ensure that there are some local content requirements, for example, inside, which also gives opportunities to local entrepreneurs and just does not facilitate imports of equipment and services from outside. We know some examples in Africa, where this also does not contribute to long-term sustainability of investments, because in the end, if you introduce public lighting by solar, and then there's no business model behind, and the equipment has just come from outside, and then there's no local service companies available which maintain the system, it's not sustainable in the long-term view. So basically, with this program, we're really also closing a bit the missing link in the energy transition, strengthening the regional level. After a while, when we established these centers, we saw many of these centers, I mean, they're working in different contexts. But on the other hand, many issues they are facing are similar with regard to the energy transition, and many needs are quite similar. It's just the status of development, of achievement is different in the various regions, but they share common issues and share common possible solutions. And we saw that there's a lot of scope for cooperation, let's say South-South, and triangular cooperation between the centers. So, for example, the African continent centers, they are sharing a lot the challenges of decentralized renewable energy penetration. So the lack of access may very often in remote rural areas. We know the challenges with regard to cooking. We know the challenges with regard to electrification in rural areas. And decentralized renewable energy will be an important part apart from the grid extension in this revolution. We know the policies which are in place with very ambitious goals regarding rural electrification. Also, you can read them in the SDG 7. And here comes a very important aspect of the cooperation between the centers. Because as the challenges are so similar, there's a lot of beauty and a lot of added value to cooperate with each other and share experiences on regional tools and modalities which were used. For example, in West Africa, there are modalities to scale up the market for off-grid equipment, and the same you have in East Africa. And for example, East Africa has a lot of experience with off-grid, developing the off-grid market. So currently there's a program financed by the World Bank, which is replicating a bit the success in East Africa, also in West Africa, and the center is part of that important program. And there's a lot of joint learning between the regions. And we saw also very soon the small island states, they are sharing a similar challenges when it comes to increased renewable energy penetration. We know all want to decouple the fossil fuel imports. We all know that renewables are very competitive in this island context, but somehow all are facing some challenges, particularly when it comes to the integration of renewables, to variable renewables into the electricity system. So these power systems in future must become very flexible. These power systems need flexible storages, where different technologies are really available. Many are thinking about battery storage. We also heard about the electrification of the end-use sector of transport, which makes sense in island countries. So there's a lot of scope to learn from each other on these issues. For example, what is the best way on regional level to promote this knowledge which is needed, or the adaptations which are needed to integrate better renewables in a higher penetration and to get the electricity system more flexible in future, and how to integrate the battery storage. So basically these centers are, for example, the center in the Pacific and the center in the Caribbean already working on these issues together. Also, a recent example is that the center in the Caribbean and the center in the Pacific established regional frameworks and policy frameworks for electric mobility integration into power systems. And these policies are currently under approval and will be then also implemented on national level together with the centers. So this platform offers the opportunity for South-South cooperation and triangular cooperation between the center. It's a platform for joint coordination, learning, projects, campaigns, tools, knowledge, and fundraising. And it offers the opportunity also for international partners, if they're interested, to move forward a specific new topic. For example, gender is one important topic, gender and energy in all of the centers, and some are doing quite fantastic work in that area. So we can also move that subject forward in the islands through the centers, or in Africa, or globally through the network. And this is carried forward from the region for the region. And this platform is not just a platform where the centers meet annually, it's also a virtual platform that you can access, www.gensec.net. And there all the information resources of the centers come together in real time. So now to come a bit to the mission and vision of those centers. So all these centers try to address the barriers for inclusive sustainable energy technology markets regionally through regional tools and methodologies. We know that the introduction of these new products and services, they are facing some challenges, which are usually on institutional level, policy regulational level, on the level on the technology, access to finance and technology. There are also financial barriers, economic barriers, and for sure capacity barriers and awareness barriers. And finally, also there are barriers locally, which are related to entrepreneurship and innovation. So not barriers only on the demand side, but also on the supply side. And these barriers you can address on regional level, and exactly that the centers are doing. So the mission of most centers is to develop an integrated and inclusive regional market for renewable energy products and services. So the efforts are part of the general economic integration efforts of the regional organizations. So they do that by creating demand for renewable energy and energy efficiency products, and on the other hand, also ensuring quality supply of products and services. And that they do through regional methodologies which address the barriers which I was mentioning before. And that should lead to the environmental, social, and economic impact on regional level, but also on national level, and finally also on global level, when it comes to the achievement of SDG 13 on climate change, or SDG 9 on inclusive and sustainable industrial development, infrastructure and innovation, and for sure SDG 7 on sustainable energy. So what the centers are doing to stimulate that renewable energy and energy efficiency product and service market on regional level. So through the centers, we create the regional institutional capacity to contribute to that. And then usually these centers, the design of the centers always look a bit differently, but usually all of them intervene in those fields what you see. So these fields what you see are usually in line with the barriers which are existing. So usually they are contributing to policy, regulation, and standards. So they come up with regional policies, regional regulation, and regional standards, which are then help national countries to implement them jointly on national level. And the regional centers also sometimes depends what is needed also to provide some capacity and resources to implement these standards. So for example, in ECOWAS, as I was mentioning before, the center was setting up a regional policy for renewables and energy efficiency, and help then with consultants in the individual countries to develop national action plans. So all of the ECOWAS countries have now these action plans, and they are translating now these action plans into concrete secondary legislation in terms, for example, of efficiency standards for appliances and lighting, or equipment standards for renewables, or currently also in West Africa, they have set up a qualification standard for solar installers on regional level, where the regional center has helped. And now this is also implemented on national level, the standard in cooperation with various educational institutions. So this is a nice example. Also, these regional standards for efficient appliances, the centers help to develop them on regional level, and now they implement it on national level. These are nice examples, I think, under policy and regulations, but there are also other examples. Knowledge management and awareness is also a nice example. So most of the centers work on establishing regional information system. Quality data availability is a problem in most of developing countries, but also in small island developing states, just because the local institutions are sometimes don't have the capacity to do so, or also not the knowledge. So most of the centers they are trying to establish information systems. Some of them are GIS based, like in the Caribbean and also in West Africa. And they're contributing in presenting also the the region as an interesting market to invest in renewables and energy efficiency, and provide quality data and analytics also, which are important. These analytics, very important, is to inform governments on the energy transition. Another important intervention level is usually qualification and certification. So the centers help to come up with regional tools and methodology for qualification and certification. I was mentioning the regional standard for PV installation. Another example is the RECRE in the MENA region, covering the Arab countries, has established a certification scheme for solar thermal installers, which is carried out on regional level in cooperation with national institutes. Also a nice example from the region for the region, with support of international partners. But finally, with sustainability, because there's a local institution which carries that on beyond the project close. There are many other examples on qualification and certification. I will not go into detail with that. For example, mini-grids was a very important issue for the African centers. For example, there was developed a tariff tool, a tariff calculation toolbox for mini-grids and other policy toolkits for mini-grids. Access to finance and technology is a very important point also. Here, the centers are very often working together with regional development banks. Also, some of the centers have their own investment facilities. For example, the ECOWAS Center has already in the beginning, 10 years ago, established an instrument, a grant instrument for promoting renewable energy investments in rural and peri-urban areas of West Africa. So they supported feasibility studies with grants. They supported mini-grid investments with grants. They supported also off-grid installations, or also entrepreneurship projects where they, for example, supported clusters of women which producing cook stoves, or solar assembling, PV solar assembling in Ghana. That were very interesting examples. And 10 years ago, this was a very innovative approach, because entrepreneurship innovation was not on the picture of the energy corporation, because most of the activities were just focused on installation on the demand side, but not so much on the supplier side and quality infrastructure side. And that brings us also to the final component, which is very important, that is in entrepreneurship and innovation, is a very important area, because here comes also the inclusiveness into play, because in the end it's important that local companies and businesses take advantage of the value chains of these global, fastly increasing value chains of global investments in renewable energy and energy efficiency. And it's important for developing countries also that they get a fair share of this. And so it's important to strengthen local entrepreneurs, the capacity of local entrepreneurs, also research and development, local quality infrastructure, so that also these investments, also if they're international, they can be sustained in the long term. A very important function when we come to the theory of change of the centers is also that these centers are important hubs to promote the diffusion and industrial upscale of innovations. So there are different kinds of innovations. It's not just, we're talking here not just about technology, we're talking also about business models. We're talking about innovative policies, for example, to address distributed solar in cities of Africa. So we're talking about a broad range of innovations, and some of these innovations, they are in the meantime tested in other regions, but not in developing countries. And it's important that these centers bring these newest innovations into the market, and that you can do very well on regional level. So you innovate, then also these centers contribute to demonstrate not just in one country, demonstrate in various countries, and then bring their experience again together, and then bring it finally to the replication, commercialization, industrial upscale of technologies but also replication of business models. And here is a very important aspect of the centers, bringing the latest innovation to the region. We know, for example, now is the discussion on green hydrogen. This is a discussion which is happening mainly in emerging countries, mainly in industrialized countries, but also there it's important that developing countries are participating in that discussion. And you can do that very well in bringing that discussion forward in developing countries through the regional level. So also some of the centers are already integrated now in this international dialogue, and also some important programs which are moving forward green hydrogen as the interesting sites for producing renewables and green hydrogen are in, for example, in Africa. So it's important to bring these innovations there. Also new business models, when we're speaking here about Industry 4.0 and digitalization, tools and technologies which are coming into the picture of the energy sector and revolutionizing also the sector currently in industrialized countries. And it's important that developing countries are benefiting from this digital solution, which can be used for mini grids, but can be used also for new utility models, particularly also important to when it comes to the more flexibility of the electricity systems we just mentioned before in the small island developing states. So this goes together. So the integration of renewables, the integration of electric mobility needs at the same time the digitalization of the sector. And these centers can bring that to the regions. Another interesting area is currently we are working very much together with SITSTOC, the small island organization promoting sustainable energy solutions, which is an intergovernmental organization. We're working with them strongly on the promotion of ocean energy technologies, because this is of particular interest for small island states. But currently this the knowledge and the technology is mainly focused in industrialized countries and emerging countries. And there's a need of the industry to test their solutions, because some of them, they're not commercial still, but they will become commercials. And the costs are also coming down through the next 10 years. And there's need for demonstration. And there's need to demonstrate it in tropical climates. So it's interesting to do that, for example, in small island states. On the other hand, small island states have an interest. So these centers now, in the Caribbean and the Pacific, for example, they're working through a global platform, which we try also to establish as UNIDO, also in partnership with other partners like ARENA, to bring these solutions to the islands, and helping on the other side the industry to test these solutions. Yeah, this is somehow what all of the regional centers are doing, and they do it their own way. They do it from the region for the region. We as UNIDO, we are let's say we are part of it at the beginning through the first operational phase, but then also we lose control, and that is nice to lose control. And these centers operate their own way according to the culture of the region. Here I show you, let's say, the GenSec makerspace, the makerspace of the global network of regional sustainable energy centers. What we're doing with the centers, we are connecting the national level with the regional level and international level. And we also connecting different stakeholders. So it's, as I said before, it's a multi-stakeholder partnership. Each of the centers is its own regional multi-stakeholder partnership, bringing together national entities like the utilities, civil society, private sector associations, and ministries and agencies on the one hand, and bringing them together also with the regional players which are already existing. Like in most of the regions, you have the utility organizations already, the power pools in Africa, the utility organizations in the Caribbean. You have also very often the regulators already in place, regional regulators in place. You have regional civil society organizations in place. So we connect those, And also the regional centers, which probably have the mandate to promote renewables and energy efficiency, work with these regional partners. For example, the power pools, all of them, they're working on their master plans, capacity expansion plans for 2030, 2050. Some of these master plans were very traditional, I would say. In the past, this has changed now over the last 5 years, I would say, also through several initiatives which were done in cooperation with institutions like ARENA and also our regional centers, so that these master plans integrate better the perspective of renewable energies in addition to large hydro. So not just looking at large hydro, looking also at other renewables like PV and so on. Small hydro, medium-sized hydro, which role they can play in an interconnected system. And the power pools, they're working, they have their master plans, and all of the power pools, they're usually focused on, the regular business of utilities. So they don't have so much time sometimes to really deal with demand side efficiency, to really do, although many of the regions have a lot of losses in the grid system, but they are not so they're usually dealing maybe with this one, but they're not dealing with the losses on the end user level. And here the centers come into play, because they are also deal with the end user issues like appliances, and this has to go together. So when you want to reduce the losses, you cannot just look at, some countries have 30% losses, no, in Africa or in small island states. And you cannot look at just reducing the technical losses in the grid, also the commercial ones. You also have to look at end user level, what happens with inefficient lighting, what happens with the appliances. Sometimes also there's some short-term activities like changing LED lighting. Okay, this is an emergency measures, but if you don't introduce standards, then this will have not a long-term effect. This will just come in again into the market, the inefficient products. So there's a match where these institutions can work together, and usually the regional centers should work with the power pools on those issues based on their comparative advantage. And that is currently happening in Central America, also with our center, where the regional center is working with the CIAPAC, the connected, which has the aim to connect the electricity markets in Central America. It happens with the CARILEC in the Caribbean, it happens with the West African Power Pool, it happens with the East African Power Pool, and there's a lot of scope for cooperation. And finally, this national regional level and the players are connected through the GenSec makerspace with the international level, because, as I mentioned before, there are many international organizations active in the sector. We know also finance is going up. We have institutional investors. We're having like pension funds which are increasingly going or want to go in that sector. We're having bonds. We're having the discussion about the increase of the green bonds. We're having the Green Climate Fund. We're having the Global Environment Facility and all the financial facilities. We're having the development banks. And they have to, in a very short term, to upscale their financial activities. And we know there are a lot of problems. There's finance there very often, but there are no projects, or the project don't have the sufficient quality. They don't have the sufficient quality because the soft environment around those investments is not right. It has very often something to do with regulation in the institution. It has something to do with fossil fuel subsidy arrangements which are in place. And there also the regional centers, as they are good in the soft issues, in dealing with the soft issues, can be very excellent partners. And some of the international partners search to give their programs more impact, search the regional level, to work on it, to use their resources wise. That was I wanted to mention regarding the GenSec makerspace. So I would encourage, if you see this video, if you're a donor, please support us, support the network directly, support the centers directly, or support the GenSec platform. If you're a private foundation and you use the best way to accelerate the energy and climate transition, then also look at the regional level, try to support us. if you are an industrial company working in renewables and you're interested to invest, please don't hesitate to contact us and work with our regional centers. We will try, we as UNIDO, we will try to build the bridge to the regional centers. So and now we come to what UNIDO does. So we, as I mentioned before, we as UNIDO, we are not owning the centers. We don't want to own them. We know from our experience from other programs like the cleaner production centers, it's important that these centers work in a self-sustaining way, and they are based on ownership. So what we are usually doing is we're helping during the preparatory phase. As you can imagine, as they are regional intergovernmental organizations, they require ratification processes. There must be agreements between ministers, and we are the ones who are working closely with the regional economic commissions and the member states to build this consensus, to come up with the technical and institutional assessments, to do a design for the first operational phase, and also then to facilitate the approval by ministers and head of states, and also facilitating the ratification process, because usually these centers require the signing of an intergovernmental agreement. We also then helping with mobilizing the first seed funding for those centers, which is always very complex because it's difficult to find international partners who invest in the core activities of such centers, because usually everybody wants to finance technical activities, but nobody wants to finance institutional development, and that is a big challenge. If you and a donor is watching this this video and you are interested in supporting the long-term institutional capacities of the energy transition, please contact us, and we would encourage you to not just look at the technical level, also help to support the institutional level, so the technical level can be brought forward. So usually we're helping with finalizing these financial arrangements, and then starts usually the first operational phase, and that is a very important step here, because usually then also there starts the selection process of the host country and the leadership of the center. And this selection process is usually, we recommend to do it on a competitive basis. So these countries put forward bids in line with established criteria, depending on the region. I also have to say the entire design of these centers is always different depending on the region. And that competitive process is also facilitates the ownership of the centers, because countries are proud that they can host the organization, and usually have to provide also financing or office space to the center. So our role through the first operational phase is usually we help with the institution building, we help with the technical program development. So usually some of the centers are completely new, so we help with doing the rules, developing the rules of procedures, financial rules of procedures. There's also quite some institution building work, intensive institution building work at the beginning particularly. At the same time, we help with building up the technical program, the flagship programs. It's important that the center has from the very beginning very visible programs in the region, but also internationally, so it can attract financing in a very short way, in the short term. Also, we help then in building up the international partnership level. It's very important for us. We need to scale up partnerships as soon as possible, as that ensures the long-term sustainability of the center. And usually in the second phase, we are going out of the institution building, and we are becoming, in the ideal case, a partner like anybody else, doing joint programs with the centers and still coordinating the entire global network. We succeeded in most cases, not in all. In some cases, we still are also supporting beyond the second operational phase, but usually we don't intend to. So what we are using here is quite an institutional peer-to-peer learning approach. Quite some departments on the UNIDO side are also involved in that process. For example, on institution building, we are providing mentoring services, and we see our support as timely limited. So over the years, we developed based on lessons learned and experiences, and also on things which went very well and things which did not work very well. We developed somehow GenSec quality principles. So one of what has turned out to be important is to be that it's part of a global program. So it's a programmatic approach in the meantime. So we have several centers, and the centers can learn from each other. So many modalities, for us, it's not very difficult anymore because we have done it already several times before. We know the challenges which can come up during the implementation, and we can adjust the rules and procedures of the centers already like this. So there's a lot of joint learning ongoing under the GenSec platform already between the centers on institutional aspects, but also on regional modalities, what they have implemented already. So it's really interesting to see that. We see that as a decentralized network, so we're providing a space, but I think it's proven internationally that innovation happens at best if it's decentralized and not centralized. And we see it also like this. So we also this network is based on regional integration theories and methodologies. I myself was basically before I joined the energy sector, was a specialist in European integration. So I had the opportunity to somehow merge here. That's a regional integration theories with the energy sector, and that brought some innovation. And that is also nice to see it after 10 years of experience we are having. So usually these centers are demand and ownership driven. So we get a request from the region, not we are facilitating that. And it's ownership driven. So these centers are owned by the region and not by us. And also the management of the center, although we are financing the management maybe in the beginning, or through the first operational phase, is not reporting to us. The management reports to the relevant bodies which are established. There's usually an executive board, and usually also ministers meeting where the management of the center has to report together with usually the energy unit which exists in the regional organization. We don't want to do blueprints, very important. So this is always, we have at least 1 year preparation. It's important to do the assessment. It's important to shape the discussions between the member states. It's important to understand the status of the region. It's important to understand the unique pathway the region wants to take with regard to renewables and energy efficiency. So usually this design of the centers is tailored to the needs. There are similarities, but usually it's tailored to the needs and also the status, the technically, in which status the region is currently. So usually you have the challenges, the energy challenges, you have the opportunities, which are very specific with renewables and energy efficiency per region. And then you have the barriers. And then you have the status, how the countries have already addressed these barriers. And then you also identify where the regional level can still bring an added value on which subject to intervene. And that is a very important process. We usually do it during the preparation process. We also notice there's very high flexibility needed. So it's a very complex diplomatic and technical process to establish these centers. And there's a lot of patience, particularly, I think if some of the core donors of the network are listening to this video presentation, they know it. It's a very complex diplomatic process because some of those ratifications can sometimes take quite a long time. And because usually the legal agreements need to be ratified by Parliament. So there are often also financial contribution required by the member states. So it's not anymore in the hands of the ministries of energy. They want to go forward, but it's in the hands of foreign affairs or in the hands of the Ministry of Finance, who has to approve those contributions to those centers, and then it gets quite complex. And that sometimes hinders that the center can work as efficient from the very beginning, as it just has no legal identity. So in the meantime, we as UNIDO, we provide this bridging support by supporting the center. In the meantime, also signing agreements, doing procurements together with the staff of the center, but still those procurements are done by UNIDO, but outside nobody sees it. because it looks like the center is already operating fully. But for sure, these complex diplomatic processes can hinder the process quite a while. But in the meantime, I think we succeeded in all regions, and all those centers have the relevant intergovernmental privileges. Also, you have to say it's difficult once you go through this high-level approval and this high-level legitimization of the region, and also this official status as intergovernmental organization. It's very difficult to close these centers down. And so you really also, beyond our support, we can be assured that this contributes to the long-term sustainability. So very important is long-term oriented support by us, but also by partners. As we give the ownership and the decision-making power to the region in line with, so we take it serious, we take the, let's say, international quality principles of aid effectiveness very serious with this program. So basically the quality principles of the Paris Declaration and also the other following meetings of Busan also, we take them very serious, and we move the ownership and the decision-making to those regional centers, and they work according to their own rules and procedures, and also work with their own culture. And sometimes it's important so that this is seen as a long-term support to the centers and not just short-term sighted. So we look at long-term partnerships with international partners. So usually the centers are very well embedded in the regional decision-making structure. All are part of that structure. So we change the regional structure of all regions with establishment of the centers is very important. So they have real decision-making power. And so they can also speak on behalf of the region on renewable energy and energy efficiency on international level. They can shape policy processes, political processes. They can also participate in very important meetings where financial decisions are taken on international level. And they build the capacity also that the region can speak up on behalf of the region, because usually the centers have then, after quite some time, quite some staff power. So all of them, they're having then 30, after quite some time, 30 staff of 30 experts, for example. So usually these regional institutions, they were complementary, as mentioned already, to the already existing regional organizations like power pools, banks, and usually some of them have also thematic hubs where these other institutions work closely with the center. We have to say these centers, they are not duplicating the efforts on national level. It's also a very important point. They also don't compete with the private sector. It's also a very important point we do in the design, that they don't compete, they don't start to do feasibility studies. No, they would work with the private sector in the countries to do the feasibility studies. And they would not compete with universities which are already existing. No, they would come up, they would strengthen those national capacities of these universities and come up with regional programs where these national universities are incentivized to work together on joint solutions. We mentioned the importance of the inclusiveness, research and development. Many solutions need to be adapted to the local circumstances. This has to be done with, or can be at best done in cooperation with local universities, and a cooperation between universities in different countries, what we know also from the European level. And I think there are also some interesting examples, for example, in West Africa, but also other regions where different universities are working together, and the center has brought up a regional program and has mobilized international finance for this program. So a strong international partnership approach is very important. I mentioned before, local management and accountability to the region is very much important. Sometimes becoming into, how I could say, it's very sensitive situations when we establish these centers, because for sure these centers becoming very attractive to international financiers. Everybody wants to work through regional organizations or through local institutions, let's say. So suddenly the centers are becoming a competitor for international partners, which also look for resources to implement programs. So this is sometimes sensitive issues, but I think we all agree that in the long term, support we have to, as partners, we have to provide to empower the local level to do these works locally and themselves in their way. Let's to say, and that is the key principle of the GenSec, is also this new deal of inclusiveness, helping the countries to do it themselves, to do their energy transition with international support, but their way, how they set the priorities. We always say also, small is beautiful and form follows function. Usually the centers start very small, and then they can expand based on their own performance. So how they perform, so there's a very performance-oriented approach embedded in the centers, they can grow. So that means also the core budget in the beginning is still often a significant part is still coming from international side or from our side, and some part from the local side. But this is only limited support. But so after the first phase, usually the center must operate with its own local resources, which comes from member states or their regional organization, and or fee for services, and or programs they mobilize funding. So financial sustainability is very important in this context. So usually we develop the financial model with the centers, which is based on the one hand, local resources, host country plus member states plus economic communities. Very tricky issue. Sometimes it's not easy, particularly in the beginning, because it could delay the establishment process very long. So sometimes these financial modalities are introduced in the second operational phase, so that when the center already has demonstrated its added value. And during the first phase, countries are often providing in-kind support through their NFIs or through other support, which is defined during the preparatory process. Then fee for service. Some of the centers are also doing charging on the services they're doing for international partners and overhead, cost recovery principle. And other areas are also then programs and projects and international finance. These centers are getting. Fee for service is always a very tricky issue, because if you start to charge for your activities, for example, we have this discussion with the information systems always. So what is public, what is sold? It's very sensitive balance to take, because usually these centers have a public mandate. They incentivize private sector participation, but particularly of the local private sector also. So if you start charging services, so you create again a barrier which you were created for mitigating. So there's always a discussion how you balance this fee for service wisely. So these are some of the quality criteria. An important quality is the institutional check and balances also, because we give the ownership to the region. So gradually in the beginning, for example, UNIDO is doing a lot of things required, but then we give up our decision-making power, and then the local management takes over, and then we still ensure institutional check and balances to the boards which are created. So also international partners which provide core finance, they're sitting in these boards, and they're reviewing the audits, the performance of the center, and also the member states are reviewing the performance in these boards. Sometimes there are also ministers in these boards reviewing the performance of these centers. Yeah, so we are coming to the end of my presentation. Thank you very much for listening to me. And thank you very much for your interest in accelerating the energy transition net zero by 2015 by using the regional level as an accelerator. I hope you become partner of the GenSec makerspace. The sun never goes down in our network, because if The centers in Africa go to sleep. The Pacific Center stands up to continue to work on the energy and climate transition. So we work 24 hours, more than 24 hours. We would be happy if you join our group. I would finally also thank the core partners which have supported this major achievement of this network over the past 10 years. In particular, I would like to mention the Austrian Development Corporation, which was the first partner of this network through the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, but more also through the Austrian Development Agency. They are the first core partner of this network. We also want to thank the Spanish Corporation, and particularly ACID in this regard. They have supported the centers also through the past 10 years. And we would also like to thank the Norwegian Ministry of Foreign Affairs for their provided support, particularly for the centers for serving the small island developing states. Very important partners, all three mentioned, and we hope that we can sustain the partnership also in future for the next phase of the GenSec. And we would encourage that other partners are joining this network soon. I could put up another slide of technical partners of the networks on international level. This slide would be, maybe we would need 2 slides because so many partners are already technical, and international technical partners are working with the centers, like the European Commission, working very strongly, GSET, the International Solar Alliance, the International Renewable Energy Agency, UN Environment is working with the centers, UNDP is working with the centers, and we would like to thank you for believing in the centers and working with the centers, and we hope we can facilitate this process also in future. Thank you very much. And I would to close with the guiding motto of our network, what is think globally, coordinate regionally, and implement nationally. Thank you very much.